Guys, welcome to Construct Your Life. Today we've got Rodney Adams on here. What a wild life he lived. We talk about his faith, his community, so many things. Ex-Marine, went through so many different trials and tribulations. He's really just an amazing stand-up human, one of my favorite guys that I've spoken to. You're really going to enjoy this episode.
Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Hello, everybody. I got him here. He's a hard man to track down. I got him. Rodney Adams, how are you doing, sir?
Good. How are you? Good to see you again.
I'm doing good. You know what's interesting about the older I get? When I was young, I cared so much about what that person did, and even with my clients now, I don't even literally care what they do. I care about who they are, how they make people feel. And, you have such integrity and you have such an understanding of who you are, even though it might be hard at times. You probably admit it to yourself. But I appreciate who you are as a person and what you stand for. So I'm really excited about this conversation.
That's cool. Thanks. Appreciate that.
You got it. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of get going from there.
Okay. I grew up in West Texas, small town kid, farm community, farm family. Went to undergrad at a, just normal party football school in West Texas. Joined the Marine Corps. Did that for 8 years. Was an infantry officer. Got out as a captain. Did 2 deployments, one to Fallujah, and then one on a Navy ship, kind of in the Horn of Africa areas where we spent most of our time. My last job in the Marine Corps was I was an ops officer, operations officer for a Dutch infantry battalion. So I lived in Holland for 2 years and planned and executed operations for a foreign military battalion, infantry battalion. And then from there, got my MBA. I worked for Goldman Sachs for a few years, started in real estate, private equity, and then got out of that and ended up in the private wealth group, working with large institutional families and foundations, that sort of thing. Got out of that, did some consulting, wasn't really sure what I was going to do. Was consulting with some large universities on strategy, kind of long range planning, worked with a defense contractor, just did a few things like that, worked with a large power grid company as a freelance consultant, just helping them with some operational stuff. And then eventually landed with my home church and became the executive director of that church there in Dallas. Did that for 5 years, due to some just churchy things that we may or may not have to go into. That came to a close. My family and I and the senior pastor's family that I was close with, we all moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I was doing that in Dallas. We moved to Tulsa in May of 2022. I started a small business, still own that, but have recently started as the executive director of a large church here in Tulsa. And so a little bit of a shift of plan as life will give you, but I oversee 80 staff, $12 million budget, 300,000 square feet of facilities. So not large in the sense of there are many companies out there larger than us, but and as the church world goes, it's a pretty large organization. That's what I'm doing.
So it's feels like there's a couple books in there. Quite a life. Marines to an MBA to, one of the things I'm fascinated about the most, and we'll unpack a lot of that in this story, is
Sure.
the identity shifting, right? One day you're in a war and you're deployed, and then the next you're in a classroom getting your MBA. But anytime I ran into a military man in college, because I went to a lot of them, I dropped out of 3, so I've been around. They were the most driven. They had the busiest schedule. They had already lived a life. How was that identity shift from you from I'm a Marine to I'm in an MBA program, and then boom, I'm in Goldman Sachs with a bunch of people that I'm not trying to label them, but maybe didn't know what the Marines were.
Yeah, sure. Well, they didn't know that, and I didn't know what Goldman was. So it was mutual. The identity shift is interesting to bring up, because at that age and time, I didn't really know what my identity was. And so you're always trying to find it. And I think a lot of guys go through that. One thing I knew for sure is, so my life is completely fraught with narrative violations. I don't really feel like I've done the thing that everybody says I'm supposed to do. So I did not get my MBA to get a good job necessarily. I got an MBA because I didn't know anything about money. I grew up in a family, we didn't have a lot of money. We had what we needed, but we didn't have a ton of money. My family were not necessarily business owners. I didn't learn how money worked. I didn't learn how leverage worked. 2 years before I started working at Goldman Sachs, if you'd have asked me what a stock or a bond was, I don't think I could give you a good answer. And it bothered me. I was a captain in the Marine Corps. I wasn't sure if I was going to get out or stay in. But as I saw my career progressing, I saw getting away from the Marines on the front line and closer to contracts and things that where money was the driving factor for how decisions got made, which is fine. Or if I got out, it obviously was going to be important. So I went to school to learn about money. And along the path, I met a guy who worked for BlackRock, and he sent me an opportunity for a Goldman internship that was specifically for veterans. And so I just sort of forced gumped my way into business. I just said yes to doors that were opening, and every door that opened, I just said yes to it because I had no other alternative really. And so after a series of a ton of interviews, and they offered me an opportunity to sit on a mezz desk within the private equity or the real estate group. So I did that for a little while. Met some guys in the private wealth group. The next best opportunity was with them, so I said yes to that. And I just kind of kept saying yes to things. And there was an expectation of performance along the way, and so I wasn't terrible. But I absolutely didn't have some master plan, and nor did I have a master identity that I was trying to shape or claim for myself. I just wanted to support my family and said yes to a lot of stuff. And it wasn't really until I left Goldman, which, by the way, I was asked to leave. It was part of a little downsize, and I was let go, and which is fine. I mean, when you're at Goldman, or a place like that, people get let go all the time. It's not really unusual. I had kind of run through the course of what the expectations were for me. By the time that I was let go, I think the expectation was that I had a book of business north of 100 million in assets under management for myself that was basically sustaining me, and I didn't need the firm to supplement my salary anymore. And I was around 60, 70 million and had a couple of deals fall through, and it was just my time. I didn't make the spreadsheet, and that's totally fine. The 2 years prior to that, I'd really been wondering, like, okay, God, like, why am I here? What am I even for? Like, what am I doing? What is this? I don't like it here. I don't seem to line up with a lot of the people that are here. I came from an extreme team environment to an extreme self environment where you eat what you kill, and if what you kill has to be your neighbor sitting right next to you, oh well. And so I probably could do it now. I didn't adjust well then. It just never fully made sense to me what I was doing there. And so being asked to kind of run the church really aligned with what I was already good at: ops and strategy and leadership, relationship building, that sort of a thing. And it really put me through a crucible of trying to figure out what am I even for? What is anybody for that matter? What are we even doing here? And so to make a long story short, or at least a little bit shorter, you mentioned identity. Trying to figure out how identity fits with like what you literally do. Like, okay, maybe I have a good firm understanding of what my identity is, but what do I do? What do I literally go do to support my family? Or what are the things that I'm supposed to go after? What is it okay to obsess over? And where do I need to rein myself in and stay a narrow course? That's kind of the quest I've been on for the last decade or so.
Guys, let me take a minute to tell you about my buddies over at Lead Hub, Ben and Aaron, the best humans I know. Not only are they amazing at marketing for trade companies, but Ben started his HVAC company in his garage, sold it for multi-million dollars. So when this guy talks, I listen. When we took over Dietz Mechanical, we had 22 reviews in 22 years. In 7 short months, we went from 22 reviews to 107. We went from a 4.2 to a 4.7. We tripled our Facebook presence and we tripled our calls. If you're an HVAC, plumbing, electric, landscaping company, and you're looking for a no BS approach to marketing, you're looking for people who have done it before, you got to go to leadhub.net. When you were at Goldman, was that in New York?
Dallas. I did some training in New York, but I was in the Dallas office.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for me, my buddy, spent many years at Goldman, works at the UT Endowment Fund now. And we talk about this on a regular basis. For me, I hadn't been to New York till I was like 30, 34, I think, give or take. I'd been, and I never understood New York. And he used to tell me about it all the time, and I'm like, I don't get it. And then I got there, and I was like, oh, okay. So this is like, let me step out of my house. Let me step on 9 people's throats as I walk to work. I'm in my zone. You know, he talks about this all the time. And I get it. I get the allure to it in my 20s. But if I were to have a family, or I'm looking for space to like create a business, like the mindset and like grow and think, it's very hard to have a singular thought there, because there is so much noise and there is so much head swiveling going on when you work at these powers, right? And so you go from that to working at a church. So I mean, it's like, you know, this huge shift. And so when they let you go and you got at the church, you know, the way you describe your story is I actually just did a podcast about this earlier this morning. I'm starting to really understand, at least I think I am. I don't think you can really understand what faith is. Like, I don't think I truly knew, like, meaning like surrender to the like you said, I bust narratives my whole life. Like, I think that I'm starting to get to the point, the only way I can describe it is business plans are useless.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and to be clear about the narrative thing, I'm not some kind of narrative violating warrior. I just feel like I've said yes to, I don't have some social agenda to break ceilings and bust narratives. Some people do, and that's fine, but that just hadn't been me. I just feel like the things God has asked me to do have been different than what narratives are accepted out there. And by the way, I mean, listen, I'm not some wacky dude. Like I'm a football playing like country kid that got a pretty mainstream but high level job, joined the Marine Corps, fought for his country, and you know what I mean? Like I'm not some I kind of have this all American looking story, but it's been one of just like, okay, God, where's the next, where's provision going to come from? If you're asking me to do this, like where is provision going to come from for the next 4 months? Because the math doesn't really make sense. Like but I've really sort of found over the last decade that that we're moving towards something that's bigger than ourselves. There's a story that's playing out that will all be buttoned up and make sense one day. And we're all kind of on this journey. And the journey, there's a purpose. The purpose for the journey actually can be known. I don't think that it can be fully known and explained in its totality on this side of the grave for all of us, because to your point, like then you wouldn't need faith. You would just need instructions. But we're all just part of this story that God is weaving together that points to him somehow. And if you sit still long enough, you can actually hear what that voice is telling you to do. You actually can know that the path you're walking down is the right path. And what a lot of us will do is try to evaluate our path based on the presence of difficulty or suffering or something like that. Say, well, this must not be what God wants me to be, and it might, where God wants me to be, might be exactly where God wants you to be. It's no secret. You don't have to be a Christian or a believer or anything to see how suffering and difficulty and obstacles and adversity form virtue, and how they shape virtuous qualities in people. The Stoics are really popular right now, the ancient Stoics. Their whole thing is about adversity and discipline, even self-imposed adversity, for the sole purpose of building you up and for achieving virtue. And so anyway, we live in this strange paradox where we try as hard as we can to minimize suffering and adversity, while also giving ourselves suffering and adversity in controlled environments for our own good. We just don't like the suffering and adversity that's handed to us without our consent. And that I think is where, I think that's where character is actually built on this journey, is how you're able to deal with the adversity you didn't choose for yourself.
And it sounds ridiculous. It doesn't sound ridiculous. It could sound like everyone, because it's my opinion. But 5 years to month and a half sober, right? And I tell everybody, last week I just had a breakthrough, and I'm in the process of figuring it out. I wanted to get sober so bad that I left every part of me behind, meaning that 20 years of alcoholism. And I realized that the only true way to be 100% healed is to even love that alcoholic. The circle. It has to go all the way through.
Yeah.
And so we move toward technology and comfort and all these things, and try to get easier and easier to this perfect perfection that we think exists because of whatever you want to call it, we're realizing that all we're doing is just creating more instability in our life because it doesn't exist. It's messy. It's mucky.
Yeah.
The whole thing. Like getting sober there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of healing, and I still haven't healed all of it, and so being comfortable, especially small business, being comfortable in the messy is the game. That is the actual thing. I think, if I'm being honest, and I'm not trying to cause a ruckus here, because I'm very careful about my church and God speak. My biggest issue with the church, especially as I was raised in the Catholic, and in Deep East Texas Baptist, was that perfection was taught the only way. And so, that's a rough way to live your life, because that you can't even compete. And so we have to get away from understanding that, it is messy. Life is not a straight road.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I would say, look, I'm not a therapist. I don't know anything, but a guy like you who's gone through that war of sobriety is as equipped to deal with adversity in small business as anybody else could possibly be, right? There's other personalities online that talk about moments where they're on the bathroom floor or whatever, worried about making payroll or whatever. Yeah. Like, that's real. Like that, those moments of despair are real. And, what's cool is how God uses where we've already been for where we're going, right? Like that place you came from is now raw material for God to use for wherever you're going, and so that training, which no one would ever ask for it for themselves, that training is exactly why you're going to make it through the fires that you're walking through today. I like that you said I like that you said that you kind of have to love yourself, you have to love the drunk. That sounds a little bit like a little bit kind of live, laugh, love, like, oh, you got to love yourself. But really, you do have to stop punishing yourself after a while. Like it's difficult. And I've never fought addiction, so I'm speaking out of a little bit out of turn, except for just a lot of intimate relationships and observations I've had. But when the addict thinks that they don't deserve the peace and joy that comes on the other side of sobriety, that is a barrier to sobriety, right? Like I have to imagine that some of we're in some ways we're made for self-destruction when we get into a place where we feel like we're not worthy of freedom. And and so I can imagine how, I mean, just what else in small business could compete with that in terms of overcoming adversity?
And
right?
ultimately, what?
Like, okay,
well, yeah, you've created such a false world, right? Of addiction. Of you know what every addict has. This is, people don't understand these little nuances about it. Every addict has that friend they can call at 10 o'clock on Tuesday when you're not working, that can go do the thing, right? And he's not going to question you. And so you spend your whole life living around people that don't hold you accountable. But the problem is the only person really not holding yourself accountable is you.
Yeah. That's tough because I've been in a lot of prisons kind of through the work of the church, and what I've noticed is that that first 48 to 96 hours when guys get out that are the hardest, because you kind of get out with your $38 or whatever you got, and you got nothing. So we're going to go to where we're familiar, and even if and safe, and I know I can get a bed. Well, yeah, I'm going to call the guys that were there for me before, and they were there for me, except for the reasons that I now have to stay away from. And they themselves may have a disordered sense of what affirmation looks like for somebody. And so they're going to affirm you in your, I don't want to make it churchy, but sin, your brokenness, your addiction, whatever that is, like they're going to affirm you in this self-destructive habit. Because it makes them feel morally adequate because they themselves are doing it, or B, because they want good things for you, but they don't understand how to express that. And so they think affirming you and your mistakes is actually loving, when actually it's like the crab bucket. Like they don't realize they're pulling you back into the bucket when you're trying to get out. It's very difficult, very complex. So the more I spend time on this, mind suck of Twitter, the more I realize just how few people know anything about actual life. But to be fair, there are a lot of people that also, we just don't know what's behind, we're all representing a particular thing for a particular purpose. We actually don't know what's behind, people's real lives.
Well, what's an interesting thing, right? And let's use Twitter as an example. I know this. You can be on it long enough to know there's certain things that I can post that are going to get more traction. If I post anything about revenue or numbers, I know enough about the human mind to be able to manipulate a post to get a reaction, right? To spur a reaction, right? And I'm not saying that I'm perfect and I don't fall into that. But what's happened to me is about 10 times now, outside of DMs, I'm talking about real life, run into them at a conference or run into them wherever, on a phone call or whatever you want to call it. And they say, hey, man, your content is really honest. Thank you. Like, boom, that's all I need. Okay. Noted. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to keep being me. And whether I gain 2 followers or 10 followers this week, because I watch it, you can see it. The people that are not being authentic, they're just baiting. And you're just like, what is the game here? Because not only with the content you're putting out, you're creating inauthentic follows, which then is not a true connection. So really, it doesn't matter at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all have different objectives on there, and the vast majority of people will like and affirm things they wish were true and not necessarily things that are true. And so it's not that difficult to I mean, when I say not that difficult, I don't do it, but you post stuff about revenue or this or that, you're going to get just a lot of people that are affirming a lifestyle they wish they had, or that they're shooting for, or that they want to be true. They want it to be true that a former addict can own a $50 million plumbing company. And it can be true. It absolutely can be true. It's 100% true. It may not be true for every human. And what I've learned, my DMs are full of, because I post mostly about, like, now I just kind of mess around in there, but my last couple of years have been posting about just fixing stuff, whatever, working with your hands, blah, blah, blah. I get a lot of guys who are like, okay, I'm stuck. I work for this company. I've been thinking about going out on my own and being a plumber or doing this, but I'm stuck. I get a ton of guys in my DMs that are just stuck. They just need to be decisive. But I don't live their life. I don't have their wife. I don't have their bank account. I don't know what factors they're dealing with. There may be 100 reasons why they won't just leave their job with healthcare and start a plumbing company, start fixing pipes for money. I have no idea. But I'll tell you this, men are hurting out there and they're stuck. And it's not just men who are addicted to substances or pornography or whatever. It's men who are just in this waist deep water of just indecisiveness. They don't know what to do. They don't know what they're made for. They don't know what their next move ought to be. They're 40 and life didn't turn out the way they thought it would when they were 24, and they just don't know what to do. I talk to a lot of guys like that. So your stuff at least gives them hope, and it gives them something. They're like, oh, okay, this is cool. Like, I want to support this guy because it's cool, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
And when you're stuck, I mean, it feels like you're never going to get unstuck, and that's the bigger issue is that, and at the end of the day, like, think about it this way, right? Like, we're not saying that you have to upheave your whole life, but like what I'm saying is, like, take a class, anyone, and just crack open an opportunity that is different from what you've been doing. Look, one of my favorite movies in the entire world is Tin Cup. Okay, not for the reasons that people think. Tin Cup. Okay, I think it's an amazing display of human psychology. Maybe they weren't trying that hard, but when he can't hit the ball because he was thinking about the girl, and he makes him put a T behind his ear and change around and like do all these weird things, and then he flushes the ball. That's life. Is that the way that you've been thinking is not working? And so we have a rule with my clients, 48 hours, no decision, or just change it up, drive a different way to work, listen to different music, because our neural pathways just get so locked into being stuck or just being in this rut that we can't even see our way out.
Yeah, totally.
So what I'm fascinated with, right? You've got you have a small business, but now you're working at the church. You've worked at 2 churches. You've been at big companies. What is your definition of community currently?
Community's tough because I think there's different layers and rings to community. I like my neighborhood, but I want to live somewhere different. I want to live in the country. We want to build our own house. So am I abandoning my neighbors, or has God put me near my neighbors for a reason? I have to stay here my whole life. How do you answer that question? I don't know. What I can tell you this is, we we moved to Tulsa for seemingly no reason. I grew up in Texas, born and raised my whole life, lived in Dallas. I met my wife in California when I was in the Marine Corps, traveled around the world, but I'm a Texan, born and bred. But we moved to Tulsa because the senior pastor of the church that I worked with before, he and his wife and my wife were all about the same age. And we've been walking together in close community for a long time. And our relationship, while not like we don't eat lunch with each other every other Sunday afternoon, but we've been through some crucibles together, personal tragedy, cultural difficulties working for the church, COVID stuff, race stuff working for the church, LGBT stuff working for the church. Like, we've been through a lot of things where we've taken a lot of personal shots. We've had to make big decisions that caused a lot of difficulty for people. And forget about the results or what all those issues actually are. When you walk through something and you kind of realize who your people are, like who's left standing on the other side, that's my definition of community. And it's actually worth changing your life for. And so, there was other factors. We did okay on our house. We got out of DFW because it was too big and all that stuff. But nonetheless, our definition of community is like who your people are, and it's hard to really, really know who your people are unless you go through shared hardships with them over time. And so, for your listeners, if you're in quote close community with people, but you haven't walked through fire together and realize that you're all still standing there shoulder to shoulder on the other side, I'm not saying that it's not authentic, because it totally is with authentic intentions, but just know that it might not be refined yet. Life hasn't totally refined that community network just yet. For the people who have done that, you totally know what I'm talking about. When I'm sure, Austin, when you are walking through, I'm sure in your days of addiction and then walking towards sobriety, there's a lot of people that bailed out on you. There's
90,
probably a lot of
90%.
people that,
yeah.
And there's probably some people that bailed out on you maybe for good reason. You hurt them. You might have broke trust with them. There's a big reason why a lot of the 12-step programs, one of the steps is reconciliation, is going back and reconciling with those broken relationships. But there's probably a lot of people that it just wasn't popular to be close to you, and they just bailed out. I'm sure that's the case. But you know what I mean? Whoever that 5% is that's still there, you totally know what I'm talking about when I say that. How do you think about community? I think we like to manufacture community that works for us, but we're usually surprised by who's left standing on the other side of a crucible. The folks who are closest to me now, I probably wouldn't have said or picked, these are my ride or dies 10 years ago, but now they are. Mm-hmm. And you see them in a totally different light. Oh, okay. We've always liked them. We just didn't know that we'd all be left standing together on the other side of some of these things. That's how I think about community. Who's there after the crucible?
Best definition I ever heard in my life. I love it. So here's my favorite topic I'm on right now. I normally ask it at the end because it's my favorite. And sometimes it goes wild. You had a small business, handyman business is still there. You working in a church, right? And you're on
mm-hmm.
Twitter X from time to time. But just overall, what is the most ridiculous kind of narrative that's driving right now in small businesses that you just think is ridiculous?
I mean, I'm a nobody. I'm just a regular guy. I fix toilets and work at a church. But I think this silver tsunami thing, it doesn't really hold up to me. This idea that trillions of dollars are going to change hands to completely different people, all of whom are currently 24, and all they need to do is borrow a bunch of money and take over one of these businesses that these, New Balance wearing, fax machine having old guys who are just dumb are going to turn this over to. It just doesn't make any sense. I think those numbers so most of those businesses will die. They're not sellable. They're not going to change hands. They're going to evaporate, and new startups are going to take their place or whatever. And most businesses are limp along way longer than they should have been anyway. So whatever that number was last year will be, smaller this year because some died, and then bigger next year because new ones started. So I just don't believe that there's this swell of this swell in biblical proportions of assets that are just going to change hands and keep going. I just don't believe that. There's something. I mean, there's going to be businesses to buy out there. I mean, but I can tell you right now, I went and dipped my toe into the tsunami pool last year, and old guy wants to sell his company, looked at a fence company, met with the owner, walked through with the GM, did a bunch of paperwork, started diligencing the business. He wanted too much money, and the rates were changing. He wanted too much, and the numbers literally couldn't make sense. I was even willing to overpay for it. I just literally couldn't make the math work because he wanted too much money. And eventually it transferred to his son. So his son was the lead sales guy in the business, didn't want the business. Dad couldn't sell it for 2 years. Now the son has it. Okay. Well, that's one tiny couple $1 million blip on the silver tsunami roll that didn't change hands to a private equity associate who left his job and took out a loan and bought it. It just stayed in the family, right? And so I don't know how ridiculous I think the quote $7 trillion silver tsunami thing is, nor do I care. I don't think it's totally true. It's not accurate that size of asset base is going to just completely change hands in the way that it's being played out on the internet. And I'm just not convinced that 24-year-olds who hate their job and spend time on Twitter should go and buy one of these companies. I just don't think I wouldn't advise that. I can't think of a single 24-year-old I know that I would advise to go buy a company right now. I just wouldn't do it.
No. Small business will take your soul and then lay it out in front of you. If I could tell you about what's transpired in 12 months, I'm 41 years old. Hey, I've read every book that exists. I've been through coaching, addiction, and even I wasn't prepared with what was coming down the pipe. So imagine
I don't
a
get
24-year-old that hasn't lived a life, that was just in his parents' house 8 years ago, managing 70-year-olds. I have 70-year-olds, 60-year-olds. Imagine that flying.
One thing that really hit me, this was a few years ago, I've started some other businesses, is when I was working at Goldman, they would kind of tell me that I was my own business unit. Mm-hmm. So you're like an entrepreneur. You're a business unit. You're like, oh, okay, great. It doesn't actually hit you until you buy the chair. Like I was sitting in someone else's chair. When you go buy the chair and the printer and the paper and you file the taxes and so these guys that have jobs, big jobs, $200,000 jobs or whatever, they're 28 years old and they're a little bit disgruntled. They've seen 150 deals, as part of a deal team in the last 5 years or whatever. I don't know. Like just interacting with the government will grind you into powder. Like I would suggest that these guys just get a side hustle where they form their own LLC and just try to make some money for 6 months I can't even imagine when I would not have been ready then to buy a $1 million company and own it. And oh, by the way, be on the hook for debt service every month. I don't know. It makes me nervous.
I love it. So if people want to reach out to you, they want to follow along with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, find me on Twitter at Rod Repairs. Right now, I'm mostly just messing around on there. Have a few hot takes on working with your hands and whatnot. I do some coaching. So guys are out there, they're feeling stuck. They're looking for purpose. I've got guys who are plenty wealthy but are asking existential questions. Am I doing the right things? How do I know if I'm obsessed over the right things? I'd love to meet them. But yeah, man, at Rod Repairs, and I answer my DMs. I talk to guys all the time who just want to chat. So I'm around.
I love it. Guys, if you like this episode, send it to a friend, share it around, rate us and review us, and we'll see you next time.